Right. Okay. Normally, as you know, we kick off with Jenny with her mortgage update. Jenny is certainly aware of the meeting, but she's not coming as yet. So what we'll do is we'll just switch it around and we'll kick off with James. So, James, do you want to crack on and introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do and what you can do for us?
Certainly, thanks, Peter. Hi, I'm James Hutchison. I'm a chartered planner. I'm a planning consultant, so I advise clients on planning strategy, planning law, and submit applications and give advice on development projects. And as Peter's mentioned, advise quite a lot on permitted development, especially of late as permitted development rights have been expanded. I've just put up my presentation on the screen. Okay. So I'll dive right into it. Essentially, just initial screen just to recap on how 2021 has been, because it very much sets the tone for a lot of the changes to legislation that happened last year. Around 3/4 of the councils within the country have delivered less than their housing need and have a very old development plan to assess applications by. Around 65% of our applications have gone over time that we've submitted to local authorities, and appeal system is equally in a very slow place at the moment, with appeals taking a considerable amount of time to progress. And there's also quite a lack of resources in local authorities to deal with planning applications that are submitted. Here are some statistics from December 2021. They're the most recent statistics for all appeal processes. And you can see that the mean average length of time for a planning appeal to go through the system is around 31 weeks. So if that's something that happens to your project, you get a refuse. So you've been all through the local authority, you've done your 8 weeks, 13-week application, it's been extended, and you didn't get the right decision, you can also expect to put on a quite lengthy period of, I think 7 months onwards for just to get a appeal decision. So it can bog down projects quite significantly if they require planning permission to go through the planning application route. This is something that's been noted by the government, and here is a statement that came out just before a lot of the permitted development legislation got adopted in the last year. And the point to note is in red down there: 7 years for local authorities to make a plan from start to finish, and 5 years after that to get permission to build the houses. So if you're looking at trying to get your house or your piece of land adopted and then get it built, you could be in for a long wait. And then the target for the target of housing being 300,000 houses nationwide per year. So the permitted development was brought out it was particularly expanded in the last couple of years to get the country building and to create a streamlined process for developers to build out units and make better use of land and buildings. This is a keynote in the explanatory memorandum that accompanied the legislation in 2020. It's streamlining planning process with greater planning certainty, while at the same time allowing local consideration of key planning matters through a light touch prior approval process. Permitted development is successively relaxed, or at least it has been over the last 8 to 10 years, by the government to incrementally get more units built generally at a smaller level, a smaller scale. So sort of 1 to 9 units, get a lot of the smaller builders, small developers bringing forward developments and better utilising existing land through sort of office to resi conversions. This is all subject to a prior approval process, whereby you are allowed a certain amount of rights to change the use of your building, but there's caveats in place to ensure the local authority has some control over certain elements of the development. So examples of permitted development legislation, many of you will know that there's permitted development rights already in place for householder extensions. Permitted development conversions have been around for some time through office to residential conversions. That's been substantially increased through what's called Class MA, which is the new Class E retail, small institutions, cafes, things like that can change over to residential, as well as just office space. Upward extensions on detached buildings and terrace buildings, as well as upward extensions on domestic residential projects as well. Those are all, the last three, all new permitted development. As I say, many of you will be aware of these extensions, so I won't spend too much time on them. Essentially, all these forms of development can be permitted developments up to certain limits on your on a residential property, and also on a small HMO. A C4 HMO will still benefit from permitted development rights. A caveat of the larger extensions is that you would need prior approval which is a small application to local authority for a larger extension at 6 to 8 metres. The government, as part of the prelude to the Class MA, created a single sort of super class of uses where it puts A1 retail, cafes, restaurants, financial professional services, is D2 sort of uses medical, health, doctor surgeries, things like that, as well as offices and certain research buildings, all fall within one single use class now, whereby you can change between any of these uses without needing plan permission, and you can also change to residential under the single class MA change of use. So it's essentially simplified all these uses into one single group. The Class MA, as I just mentioned, was brought in 2021, and simplified on the left-hand side, there's a table: shops, estate agents, workshops, cafes, offices, and so on, can all be changed into a residential use through a prior approval application. On the right-hand screen, there's some floor plans showing an example that we got consent for in I think it was around September last year, so just after September, October, so just after the rights came into force, and that enables, in this case, an A2 letting, estate agents letting office, to be changed to a one-bed residential flat. One of the key things is it has to be vacant for 3 months before you make the application, but once you make the application for the prior approval points, it's fairly straightforward, streamlined process to get to the approval. The prior approval process, so the single application you need to make to local authority needs to consider all of these points. So you need to address all of these in either plans or a statement that accompanies the application. So transport, highways, parking, contamination, if your property is in a flood risk area, it needs to have adequate natural light to habitable areas. So you need to make sure that any of the spaces that you're converting, such as a workshop at the back or an office at the back, has suitable natural light in through the windows, and also that the units comply with the national floor space standards. You can Google those there. If you just Google national described space standards, and that will give you all the floor spaces that you require for each size of unit. So for example, a studio is 37 square meters, a one-bed dwelling has to be 50 square meters. So that's a Class MA to change anything within Class E on the previous screen to residential use, making this quick, streamlined planning application for prior approval. You also got upward extensions that were brought in 2020, and these were, and there's a list of these. So for example, AA, dwellings above commercial detached property. So you could have an office block, and then you can extend up to 2 stories above that office block without needing plan permission. Class A/B, again, commercial terrace, such as the example on the right-hand side where you've got a continuous terrace and then you're adding on another floor to that building without needing plan permission. And then AC, dwellings above residential terrace, and so on. So the example on the right-hand side is you can see a 3-story building there. This was one that we got consent for in February, March last year, so around this time last year. And the rights were fairly fresh then. And that's commercial uses on the ground floor and office that got converted to residential on the first and second, and then we added a 3rd floor of new residential on top of that under permitted development. There are certain restrictions in place, such as the height restrictions above the terrace. So you can't extend more than 3.5 meters above above the lowest point of the terrace. So you need to do a bit of a study of what's around the building to make sure you're not going too high. In this case, we managed to get 1 floor because there was a particularly low building in the terrace, but where all the buildings are equal level, you should be able to get another 2 stories on top. Floor space standards apply. External appearance is subject to prior approval and consideration by the council. And there may be a need for some additional reports in terms of, as I say, flooding, contamination, or daylight issues, perhaps, if you're going to have an impact on neighbouring properties. And this is what we managed to create above that commercial building. So that was 8 new residential units, basically an additional floor on top of the existing building. But that was before the floor space standards got applied to permitted development. So now you probably get 5 or 6 units. So those are essentially the new permitted development opportunities that you have out. So essentially it's household development. You can go up above an existing residential property. You can go up above offices, commercial buildings, and a mixed-use building. So offices, retail with residential above, you can extend above that under permitted development. You can also change commercial uses and some health uses and leisure uses over to residential now without needing plan permission. Or you could do a hybrid. So for example, in the development that we had here, the first and second floors were converted from offices over to residential using 1 permitted development right, and then we added additional floor above that using another permitted development right. So so there's possibilities to amalgamate the different use classes, and the new rights have been brought out over the last couple of years. So the benefits of using permitted development rights is that there's a quick turnaround. So rather than waiting for your planning application to be determined for many months, and then if that doesn't work out, you need to go to appeal. So you could be in a process for 7 or 8 months easily. This is a 56-day application to local authority. So you can get the application in quickly and the decision out to local authority within a set period of time. There's only limited points of refusal. So the points that I mentioned for prior approval, when you make an application on those grounds, those are the specific points that the local authority can consider. So they can't go off track and start commenting on design or any amenity issues that they might be concerned about that aren't strictly limited to the few points of prior approval that you've got to satisfy the council on. It's still liable, so you will have to pay the community infrastructure levy, which is a standard tariff that gets applied to new development per square metre. You will need to pay that, but you don't need to pay any other planning contributions. So for example, affordable housing is quite often charged by local authorities on a small scale tariff, or 10 units and above will certainly attract a sizable contribution of money and or units on site to go towards affordable housing. There's no requirement for that under permitted development. There is an appeal process in place if you did get refused on the limited grounds, as mentioned, that you need to go to prior approval on. Drawbacks are you are confined to the plan, so you can't really do that much to extend the building to make it comply with permitted development legislation. It does need to comply with the criteria to start off with. So it's essential to make sure that when you look at a building or piece of land, that it will comply without needing extensions or significant alterations. The NDSS, that's National Floor Space Standards, they do apply, so you need to be very sure what size units meet the minimum requirements of the floor space standards, and that will tell you how many units you can get within your building. So for example, if you've got an 80 square metre shop that you want to convert over to residential, you'll be looking at, without any communal area, you'd be looking at 37 square meters for a studio. So you could achieve 2 studio units out of that. So it's essential to know what the floor space requirements are going to be, because that will tell you what you can divide the property into. Strict criteria controlling use of permitted development rights. You either apply or you don't. If you don't, you need to make an application for plan permission. There's no subjectivity or discretion in how the criteria is applied. Ambiguity of use. A lot of local authorities are still, even a year on, struggling to get to grips with this legislation, particularly elected members as well, because it's so new and it is quite complicated in places. So it's best to, when you make your application, spell out the planning legislation and the criteria clearly, so a local authority knows whether or not you comply or not. And the vacancy period, as I say, Class MA applications go from a retail commercial use over to residential. The property has to be vacant for 3 months before the application is made. And that's different to any other form of permitted development. So you do have to make sure that it sits empty for that 3 months, and then you make the application and that you can evidence the fact that the property has been empty for that period of time. So those are some of the benefits and drawbacks. My contact details are on this screen here. So if you've got any queries on permitted development or new legislation, please feel free to give me a call or drop me a line, and I hope I can answer any queries you've got. More than happy to take a look at any projects you've got as well and give a free initial opinion as well, just in case there's anything you want to run by me. So hopefully that's been of use.
Okay, thank you, James. Thank you very much. I think we've proved it is quite complicated. Did you want to stop your share so we can? That's it. Lovely. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that come out of that. Remind people that if you've got any questions, please do stick them in the chat box, or raise a hand or whatever. We can come on to you. So hopefully you have got some questions for James. But I think it's worth pointing out that people sometimes get a bit mixed up. Hold on, we've got someone just coming in. People sometimes get a bit mixed up between planning and building control, building regulations. So I think it's fair to point out whether it gets permitted development or not, they still got to make sure that they follow the building regulation law. So if someone's looking to add another story on top, what would building regulations have to say, do you think, about the footings, the foundations?
It will certainly need to be considered, so it's best to get a surveyor or someone qualified to look at the structural side of the building before going in. For that, you can make, as I say, I'm not actually a building surveyor, planning background, so but you are allowed to make some structural alterations to the building to be able to support it, for example, an additional floor. So you can carry out some external changes to building to facilitate that. Yeah, it will be best to get a surveyor to check the building, particularly in terms of foundations and things like that, before proceeding. And if you've got a commercial building that's got a plant room or something like that on top, or a circulation core, that's going to have an impact in that regard as well.
Okay, and then we've got a question just come in. Do existing conservation area and listed rules still apply?
Yep, so some have, well, almost, I think every new permitted development legislation that's come in doesn't apply to listed buildings. So I wouldn't try any of this with, or be very careful with any listed building changes. I think the Class E, the grouping still works. So, for example, retail to an office, you can do that under the listed building, subject to no alterations at all to the actual building fabric. But any extensions to building will be exclude listed buildings. So you'll have to make an application for listed building consent and plan permission for that. And conservation areas are one of the points of prior approval. So it doesn't rule out a site within the conservation area. You just need to look at the vitality and what the change of use is going to, how that's going to impact the character of the conservation area. But most PD changes aren't excluded within the conservation area, particularly change of use. Upward extensions are, change of uses aren't.
Okay, and I vaguely remember, I think it's the last time I heard you give this talk, if you're looking to add an extension, say under permitted development, you're not allowed to put windows in the existing fabric, or have I got that wrong?
You can. You'll need to make an application for to put any windows into the building. You can utilise existing buildings on the. Sorry, you can utilise existing window openings in the front and rear elevation. There are restrictions in terms of where you put in windows in the side elevation. But for any physical alterations to the building, such to facilitate, for example, Class MA, you would need to make an application for that.
And I mean, I've not. Can you still make any? Hang on, another question come up. Can you still make any internal changes you like to a single-family home? So this is a property you live in. Well, it's the same rules, isn't it? So.
Yeah, it's still so any internal alterations to your home, it's essentially not development, so it doesn't need plan permission, subject to it not being listed, but it doesn't need plan permission. It may well need building regs. Yes,
well, we always say to people, make sure you keep building control on site, because virtually everything needs building regs, doesn't it? So this is very, very minor. I was interested in your comment that last year it's taking 31 weeks to get appeals through. Do you think that's due to COVID? Everything else has been blamed on COVID. Is that one as well?
Yeah, it's that the standard response is COVID slowing us down. I think it's a lot of things. I think actually that the caseload has built up considerably. I think COVID had a serious impact. It almost stopped the planning appeal process for a while, which accumulated quite a large backlog. But it's wearing a bit thin, the COVID excuse. It's not so much data anymore, it's more resources. And unfortunately, local authorities aren't helping by pushing everything to appeal, because they tend to be refusing everything at the moment. There's a very negative stance by a lot of local authorities. Which inevitably that means that the caseload to the inspectorate goes up.
Yeah. Why do you think that is, that they're going to appeal? Is because you mentioned earlier on a lot of local authorities are still not fully grasped these changes. Is that what it is, do you think, or are they just being bullshit?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. There's generally a lack of resources within local authorities. Each case officer is carrying very high caseloads, so there's no time to speak to applicants about their applications, and dare I say it, there's somewhat of a lack of experience within local authorities as well, and that's not helping, particularly at a management level when they're not properly supervised. There's some very pretty bad decisions that are being made. In fact, actually Friday we got a decision through with a full cost award against Havering Council, where the inspector found their behaviour was completely unreasonable, and awarded the appellant, our client, a full award of costs against the local authority, because the refusals just aren't being substantiated with evidence, and that's a problem.
Yeah, okay. And of course, you've got the other problem as well. You mentioned working from home. All the local authorities I've been talking to recently, they still don't seem to have any plans to get staff back into to work. That's really slowing things down, isn't it? So
it is. It's a massive communication problem, really, because while they're out at home, I'm sure they're getting their work done and writing reports, but the communication isn't there anymore.
yeah.
And so a lot of issues that can be easily resolved just don't get picked up, and that's just generally creating more work in the long term. So yeah, I think it's definitely having a negative impact, all the home working at the moment.
I remember a while ago I did a permitted development a few years ago, and although I was able to do what I wanted to do, I had to inform the neighbours what I was doing. Is that still the case?
Yeah, so for a larger rear extension, so on an attached property, you can go out 3 meters without notification. On detached property, you can go out 4 meters without notification. If you go out any further and exercise a larger rear extension permitted development rights, so that's 6 meters on attached or 8 meters on detached, the local authority will notify neighbouring properties. And if they object or write anything at all within the first 21 days of the application, then it triggers the ability for the local authority to carry out an assessment on what they perceive to be the impact on their amenity. So it's very important, if you are going down the route of adding a larger rear extension onto a property, to speak to your neighbours before making the application, to make sure they don't object within as far as you can, to make sure that they don't object and write in those first 21 days.
Yeah, because if they do, then it's apparently it all gets kicked into the long grass for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, local authorities don't generally like the larger rear extensions because they are they can be very big. So if it gives the local authority the chance to have that, make that assessment, they will do, and it quite often will be fairly negative.
Okay. Let's have a look. No, we don't have any other questions. So before we let James go, has anyone else got any other questions that they want to put to him? We are recording this, and I will, when I've edited it, it won't be today, but the next couple of days, I will send it out to the people that have logged on here, so you'll have a chance to see it again and see the pearls of wisdom. So not really connected with the talk, but are conservation area rules about the facade overlooking a public road? In other words, can you make a change to an appearance overlooking the rear garden?
Yes, so under permitted development, you can change the appearance of the facade, the rear facade of the building.
All right.
That generally, the front facade, if you're in a conservation area, you won't be able to clad it or put timber cladding on or other things that otherwise you might be able to do within an ordinary area. So yeah, the facade treatment is restricted generally in the conservation area. Sorry, the one thing I haven't mentioned with permitted development overall is to look out for Article 4 directions as well, to make sure that there's no Article 4 directions that restrict permitted development rights in your area where you're looking.
Okay, well, let me just briefly explain Article 4. Most people tend to think Article 4 is only for HMOs, but Article 4 is where the local authority has stopped a particular permitted development. So one of the permitted developments are that you can convert a single dwelling into an HMO without getting planning permission, but some local authorities remove specifically for HMOs, which means you've then got to apply for planning. So you're saying that they could take away permitted development on, say, for sake of argument, adding an upwards extension or something like that?
They could do, yep. So that's one of the ones that they could take. Going back to the facade point, there's a quite a famous case, I think it was Kensington, or one of the West London boroughs, where someone wanted to paint the front of their house pink and white. And generally speaking, you can paint a house a different colour if you want to. But if they can put Article 4 directions on to even control small things like the colour of your property. So it can be for anything, any change of use, or even the replacement windows is another one in conservation areas. So to stop people taking out timber windows and putting UPVC windows in instead, a lot of local authorities will have Article 4 directions restricting your ability to do that.
I mean, talking about the painting of the front of the house, that's you get Article 4 just for conservation area, or I mean, if I've got a property, a ordinary standard property, not in a conservation area, and I wish to paint it, I can do.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought there's any reason why you can't. Article 4s aren't specific to conservation areas. So you could have a house or some restriction outside of conservation area that's restricted, but right. It's very unlikely that you would have. It generally runs with a conservation area because the painting of the house isn't even controlled through conservation area legislation. So you have to have an additional layer of control on top of that to stop you painting your house if you wanted to paint your house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. If you're feeling a bit bored and want to paint it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So any more before we lose James? And we'll just spend the last part of the time just to briefly talk about Section 21. But no more questions there. So, all right, James, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think it's worth saying to people that it's clearly not straightforward. And if you're looking to do permitted development or any planning, strongly recommend you do use someone such as James. And obviously, he would far prefer it if you used him. What area do you cover, James?
I'm based on the south coast near Arundel in West Sussex, but I cover predominantly London and South East, the home counties. But in saying that, I do carry out a lot of work further. I was in the Yorkshire Dales last week or the week before last, so I can look at projects elsewhere as well.
Well, the majority of our members are in the southeast, so and I know you're talking for us physically, face to face at the Southampton meeting.
Yeah.
The date of which I've actually forgotten, but anyway, I'm sure it'll come back to me in a minute. Oh, there we go, May the 16th.
Yeah.
So so if you want to meet James face to face, come to the Southampton meeting. Right. Okay. Well, James, thank you very much.
Okay.
We sometimes get questions coming afterwards, which case I'll whiz them through to you. Okay. You're very welcome to hang on, but we're just going to have a quick chat about something that's come up recently, which is the Section 21 changes. So if you wish to leave us, not a problem. If you wish to stay, not a problem.
Well, I'll hang on till the end just to hear that, because I'll be quite interested to hear that anyway.
All right,
so,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, just to remind people, it was in the news, it's gone out, that Section 21, a little bit of confusion. You still have got Section 21. You can still quite definitely use Section 21. The government made an announcement last week under Levelling Up. There were 135 pages. The document that went out with it was 135 pages long. And there was one page on property and one paragraph on the potential changes, do stress potential changes to in the private rented sector. And they mentioned specifically that they're looking at abolishing the Section 21. They're looking at higher standards for property. The rumor has been what they mean by higher standards are for energy standards. So with MEES, minimum energy efficiency standards. So we anticipate, we don't know, but we anticipate that there will be a white paper come out specifically on rental. It hasn't come out as yet, so there's a huge element of guessing. I would point people at our, let me just put it up. I would point people at our campaigns page. If you go to the website, look along the top, you see campaigns, and the top one is the unintended consequences of losing the Section 21 notice. And if you look at that, there's a bit about the announcement that came out last week. So it's got some wording there of it, but also our campaign where we've written to different MPs. Do write to your MP. If you think if he's going to give you a problem, it's no good just writing to your MP with a general whinge about, oh, we think it's wrong to lose the Section 21. Try and give examples where in your particular the particular letting that you're doing will cause problems. I will give an example, and this landlord has actually given us permission to use this example, so not a problem at all. But we have a landlord who helps and assists people back onto the straight and narrow when they've had a checkered past, and they do that with an HMO, and they have recently had a problem with one of their tenants who's causing antisocial behavior with other tenants, and the only way they can get rid of that tenant is with a Section 21. And in their example, they would have real problems in the future, So if anyone has got any specific examples, please do let us know, because we can use it when we're talking to MPs, etc. So if any of you have had an example where you've had to use a Section 21, it tends to be with antisocial behaviour. I know that people will use a Section 21 for rent arrears, but we can't use that as an argument because you do have Section 8. The other reason at the moment that people use a Section 21 is if they wish to sell the property. We're told, although it's not happened as yet, we're told that the government will be amending ground 1 of Section 8, which is to sell the property, because at the moment it's very, very difficult to use. We're told they're going to amend that, but we'll wait to see. So please, 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 if you've got any examples of where you've had to use a Section 21 in the past, or where you believe it may cause problems in the future, please do let us know. So, if anyone wants to make any comments on that or questions or whatever, please do let me know.
Peter?
Yeah, okay, Derek.
I've mentioned this to you before, that I'm reinforcing. The situation where you get the death of the landlord and the property needs to be sold to meet the terms of the will.
Okay, yep. Thank you, Derek. So,
I mean, if Section 8 Clause 1 is being enhanced to cover that, that would be fine. But we need to make sure it does. Okay. Well, let me just say to people that Section 8 Ground 1, which I doubt many people have even heard of, is basically at the moment allows you that if you have previously lived in the property and before the new tenancy agreement commences, you have advised the incoming tenant that you may wish to sell it in the future, both of which are extremely unusual circumstances, then you could use Ground 1. So as I said to you, it makes Ground 1 almost unusable. We wait to see what the new Ground 1's going to say. We hope that there will be a white paper, and that in the white paper there will be the sort of reasonings that you can use Ground 1. One of the other ones that we're told will come about as well is if the landlord or the owner wishes to move, or his family wish to move back into the property. That's another one. But thank you, Derek. That's a good one. So we will bear that in mind. So anybody else got any more comments or questions? Council are introducing selective licensing. This is a question that's coming. Sorry, I'll read this out. Councils are introducing selective licensing on the basis of antisocial behaviour, but without Section 21. It means landlords cannot take any action to remove a problem tenant. Exactly that. As I say, if you look at the paper we put out on unintended consequences, that's really the point we're making there. That it's going to be really, really difficult getting rid of tenants who create antisocial behaviour. And it's a real problem in HMOs, where if you get one tenant creating trouble, and it can be minor, it can start off as a minor thing. It might start off as, I don't know, somebody stealing milk from somebody else, say, but then it just starts to grow and grow. And the landlord has he or she must do something about it. But quite frankly, all you can do about it is to ask that tenant to stop doing whatever they're doing. After that, it's eviction. So it's going to be a problem in the future. So I'm going to say again, someone said any time for any new Section 21 regulations are likely to be introduced. No, none at all. If I were to guess, and please do bear in mind this is a guess. Okay, I'll come back onto your one in a minute. If I were asked to guess, I would guess we will get a white paper from the housing minister sometime in the next month or two. Although, just to add to the confusion, there is talk that the current housing minister may get reshuffled to go back to being a whip. So maybe once again we lose the housing minister in the next month or two. But assuming we don't, then I would guess we would get a white paper of some sort within the next couple of months, with a view to it going through Parliament this year, with a view to it becoming law April of next year. But that, please understand, is a complete guess on my part. We don't know at the moment. Right, so going back to the question we've come in, I've still got people coming in. Regarding Section 21's, right, its use was already restricted by the need to prove that you've showed the tenant the gas certificate before they signed the contract. That has gone to appeal, and at the moment that's not the case, but we still recommend it. So what we're saying there is that if you had not shown the incoming tenant the gas certificate before they took occupation of the property, then you couldn't use the Section 21. We've got another one here, another Section 21 consequences. Some landlords may have to sell if they cannot remortgage, or death estates owned to buy to let properties may have to sell for inheritance tax properties. Let's hope Section 8 ground 1 covers that. It'll probably be a different ground actually, but yes, as you say, let's hope Section 8 covers that. A landlord is trying to sell his buy-to-let flat, but has difficulty in trying to evict him. He has approached the Council for Accommodation, was told not to vacate the property, and court action has taken place. Right, okay, let me just rephrase that one. If you are evicting someone using Section 21, the local authority have a duty of care to try and assist that tenant where they can. That was amended, I think, I can't remember how long ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, so that the local authority have a duty of care to evict someone, to help someone where they're going to be homeless within 56 days, which is more or less the period of a Section 21. So a lot of local authorities are advising their tenants to stay in place until they get a bailiff's order. Now that's actually unlawful, and I can't remember the bit of law. If anyone out there can remember the bit of law, but there's a bit of law which came out a couple of years ago, which was intended to stop local authorities doing that. What we always say to people is, if your tenant's being told to stay in situ, then point the local authority at the bit of law which tells them they can't do that. They have to deal with the tenant who's going to be homeless within 56 days. So please do that. Any more for any more? Right, Rodney, please do unmute yourself. And sorry, okay, there you go.
Hello, Peter. Nice to see you. Just in a kind of parallel to the Section 21 stuff. Obviously, another thing that we might want to raise, along with the other unintended consequences that we've already highlighted in our document, is over well, I was going to say recent, but several years, the government has put various caveats on things like gas safety certificates, deposits, and other things that you can't serve a Section 21. And I just wonder if the courts apply the same level of detail when you serve a Section 8, or whether these are things that they will be looking to add to the Section 8.
Yeah, well, of course, in a world we don't know, we, as I keep saying, we've been making noises to MPs. And the surprising thing I have to say is that the number of MPs who don't know anything about this. So we wrote to all MPs, December, I think, wasn't it, Rodney? So,
Yes.
yeah, we wrote to all MPs to point it out to them. And a few of them have come back to us to say, well, we know nothing about this. We probably will be doing a meeting for all MPs somewhere in London, hopefully at Westminster Hall, which is attached to the Houses of Parliament, and then invite people from the public to come as well. There's no point in doing it until a white paper comes out, because we don't know the details. All we know is, as I say, if you look at that campaigns page, even if you're not a member, you can see that campaigns page. So it gives the government announcement, and we've reprinted it because it's so short. Basically, you know, this is our intention too, etc., and that's it. Just, I think, about 6 or 7 lines. That's all they're saying.
And if I could just add, just generally, of trying to avoid tenant arrears, those that take qualified students, so graduates, should always bear in mind when they do their affordability that graduates will be paying a 9% surcharge on their income. So do factor that in to your calculations if they're earning a reasonable salary.
You mean extra? You mean people who have been students and have graduated?
Yes.
To pay back their student
so
loan.
It may well be worth asking whether they have a student loan.
Yes.
And also just be aware of the likes of Klarna and the easy pay schemes that are available to people. I mean, the scary thing is that people are being offered pay over 3 months to buy a burger, for instance.
Do you want to expand on Klarna? I've not heard of that. What's that one?
So they're a buy now, pay later service where rather than use a credit card, it's basically you make 3 payments typically, but much like payday loans and the rest of it, there's always the likelihood that they're going to get caned at the other end.
Yeah. Yes, I know. So it is difficult.
And finally, in the last few weeks, there's been a change to the benefits where if someone doesn't accept a job, or I'm not quite sure of the exact terms, but they've started to restrict benefits for people that won't accept a job because it's not the job that they want. And previously you had 3 months to find something, and now they're restricting that to 1 month. So
yeah,
we'll just have to see where that one goes.
That was in the news section that went out. So, but yes, it is worth reminding people about that. It's also worth reminding people, by the way, we're going a little bit off piece, but I think it's worth reminding people, if you've got an EU citizen in your property who are quite perfectly able to be in that property, if they haven't applied for settled status, they can remain in your property, but they won't be able to get any benefits. So you need to factor that in as well. Eric, you were trying to ask a question. So do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? And you still, that's it, away you go.
Basically, I'd just like to point out my mother used to be a landlady, residential landlady, and we used to take students, which meant that you didn't have to pay council tax. This is really following on from Rodney's point. And one day we had a postgraduate come along, and we had to turn him down because we wouldn't have got the council tax allowance, basically. my mother was able to pay a single person's council tax because all her tenants were students. It's just something to throw in, basically.
Yes, there's a couple of things with that. It depends on that particular local authority. I think most do give exemption for students, but also the students have to apply for it. If they don't apply for it, and some local authorities, I don't know how long ago this was, Eric, but
in the 1990s.
Right, okay. It has changed as much as most local authorities insist on 100% occupancy by students. So you can't have a mix. So if you get the situation, say you get 4 students in there and they all apply, not a problem, you get the exemption. But then if one of them drops out of university, gets a job, but stays in the property, that can cause problems with the exemption. So suddenly there's no exemption, and somebody somewhere's got to pay the full council tax. The other students don't know anything about it, and a year or 2 years down the line, you the landlord may suddenly get a bill because one of the exempt students is no longer exempt. So you do need to keep an eye on that one. All right. Any more? I mean, we always like to roam around different things in this when we have this talk. So Rodney, come back in again, yeah.
Yeah. So just to add on that, I did have that situation where we rented to students. We told them they needed to apply to the local authority, and some local authorities will kind of insist on having a joint tenancy agreement, and it's a struggle to get them to give the discount where there's multiple tenancy agreements within the property.
Well, if it's multiple tenancy agreements, I'm guessing that the landlord would have to pay the council tax anyway. So I'm guessing would only work in general where you do get one single tenancy agreement. Okay, Derek, I'll come on to you in a minute. Where you get one tenancy agreement on joint and several liability between, in my example, with the 4 students. No, okay. Yeah, so go on.
I've had only experience of one HMO, which I managed. The local authority did not insist on just one joint contract between all of them. They were quite happy to have several contracts with each individual person. But we did have the situation where one person ended up not qualifying for exemption, and they actually then charged us council tax at the 25% discount rate.
Yeah, so you do have to be careful on this one. That's an unusual situation because, as Rodney says, most local authorities do want to see one agreement, because if it's a room by room let, then generally the standard practice is that the landlord themselves will pay the council tax. But you know, we wait to see. All right, okay. Any more on this? No? Okay, well, I see James is still on there. So James, thank you very much again for what you said. Just to repeat to people, everyone that's logged in, I can see all of you, and we will when we tidy up the recording in the next day or so, we will be sending it out to the people who have logged in. So, okay. Thank you very much. Our next scheduled meeting is April the 4th. We don't have a topic at the moment, so to be advised. Someone's raised a question. I'll come on to that in a minute. So we had scheduled for last year, at the end of the year, a discussion on the government white paper on section 21, etc., etc. We had to cancel it, so because it didn't come out. So Margaret Collier has also got a question. So Margaret, are you wanting to come in? Please do come in, Margaret, if you want to raise it.
It was just really to say, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was just really to say that this business of section 21 being inapplicable. I had a tenant, and I'll send you the details to add. She was put in on the basis that a charity did it for me, and she was a woman fleeing domestic violence with 2 young children fully paid for on housing benefit. And I accepted the 2-bedroom rate rather than the 3-bedroom rate for that property and just felt sorry for her. But actually the problem with her was that she was a drug addict. The children never lived there, and the police were repeatedly turning up, bashing down the door. Now, because she was getting 100% of the benefits of the rent that I'd got on the tenancy agreement, and would be forevermore, it seemed, there was nothing other than a Section 21 that would have got her out. And Section 21s at that time were suspended during the lockdown.
Well, they
I'll
were.
send you the full details and the name of the council that gave the false reference that walked away from it afterwards. But it was an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, I can imagine. Would you mind sending me details of that, and we can use it anonymously to again for MPs when we tell them?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind, that's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
There's a problem really with accepting anybody who is on full benefit with the risk that if they turn sour on you, you've got no recompense at all. And so it would be reasonable to say, well, I don't want anyone on full benefit.
Well, I mean, this basically is the thrust of the paper that we put together. We didn't specifically say benefits, but we did say that in future, landlords may well be forced into the situation where they can only accept a prospective tenant who are 100% squeaky clean, pass every reference going, got absolutely no problems with income, etc., which means there's going to be a huge number of people who at the moment some landlords may be willing to take a risk on, who in the future won't get housed. And who's going to house them? Because if the private rental system can't house them, social housing hasn't got enough stock, and local and central government don't. Right, so someone raised a question with that Section 21, are we heading towards old style regulated tenancies? Is it rent control next? Right, okay, 2 comments on that. First of all, yes, we are heading not to regulated tenancies, but we're heading towards assured tenancies. They will no longer be assured short-hold tenancies. It can't be, can they? If you're going to have a reason to stop the tenancy. So it will be assured tenancies, not assured short-hold tenancies. Point number 1. This thing about rent controls, yes, a lot of people are saying that could well be the next step in a couple of years' time. Certainly, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, he wants to get rid of Section 21 and rent controls all at the same time. So, you know, watch this space is all I can say. When we get the white paper come out, it wouldn't at all surprise me if Labour put out their own white paper as well, in which case they may well be asking for rent controls. All I can say to you is when we know a bit more details, because we're all guessing at the moment, when we know a few more details, then quite honestly, we will, we will be telling everybody, and hopefully we'll have some kind of debate on it as well at the same time. But at the moment, we don't know. I've been reminded we've got a couple of things coming up. So I mentioned already the next Landlords meetup. We've also got something called Future Build, which is March the 1st, 2nd and 3rd, which, as its name says, is that it's how you can make amendments. I don't know if James, I don't know if you're going to be there, but there's a lot of architects and planning people there for big show, 3-day show at Excel. So have a look at our website for that. We will be there, but we're there. We're partnering up with, so there's us, there's Mortgage for Business and Boswell's Insurance. You know, most of you will know both of those. And we're going under the banner of Future Landlord. So rather than going under the banner of iHouse, we're going under the banner of Future Landlord, and we're partnering up with the other two. So right, okay, I'll come on, Rajesh, I'll come on to your question in a moment. So do come along to that. Very big show, covers an awful lot of things. If you're thinking about doing any kind of building work, and certainly retrospective work, then do come along to that. March the 15th is the National Landlord Investment Show, the first one of the year at Billingsgate. We almost certainly will be there as well. So someone's asked a question, does anyone know a good probate law tax advisor? I don't personally, but does anybody out there know of a good probate lawyer that right? Okay, well, we've done our hour. Thank you very much. If you've got, as usual, if you've got any questions, please do send them in. I'll send them on to James. Sorry we didn't get the mortgage update. I don't quite know what happened to Jenny. I know she's been really under the cosh recently. We've been trying to do a joint video for future landlords, and she had to cancel about 3 or 4 times before we finally got it done last week. Right, so no more to be said. So, all right, thank you very much all for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.